The clearing exuded an almost supernatural stillness, bathed in a pale, ethereal glow that emanated from no discernible source. A thin mist clung to the marshland, curling around the gnarled roots of ancient trees like spectral tendrils. Their twisted limbs clawed at the sky, silhouetted against the dim haze as though mourning the long-forgotten vitality of the world. The air was thick and heavy, saturated with the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage. Each breath was a reminder of the swamp's pervasive life and its quiet decay. Zephyr's talons made faint tapping sounds as they pressed against the sponge-like ground, the rhythm interspersed with distant croaks of unseen frogs and the furtive rustles of creatures lurking just out of sight. Zephyr halted, his eyes glinting with an intensity that suggested both curiosity and resolve. His feathered form, sleek yet commanded, seemed to absorb the glow of the marsh, his wings casting shifting shadows that danced across the misty ground. He spoke softly, as though addressing the marsh itself, his voice carrying a reverent weight. Tomodile, he murmured, his talons flexing into the sodden earth. What spawns reality? The wind responded first, a faint stirring that sent ripples through the mist, teasing the edges of Zephyr's sharp senses. It whispered around him, a low hum that carried no words but it suggested contemplation. Zephyr leaned forward, his voice dropping into something akin to a plea. What is the power of resurrection? The breeze shifted again, curling around him in a languid embrace. This time, a distant murmur rose, the faintest suggestion of a reply drifting through the air. It's complicated, the marsh offered, its disembodied voice as soft and formless as the fog. Zephyr's gaze sharpened. His eyes caught the faint glow of his surroundings, reflecting the swirling mystery of the landscape. He stepped forward, talons sinking deeper into the yielding ground. What is the function of dreams? His voice carried a demanding edge now, as if willing the world to yield its secrets. Tell me. The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken potential, the marsh resonating faintly in response. How does probability create myth? Zephyr continued, his tone softening with an ache of longing. His eyes scanned the opaque mist, as if seeking answers with its formless embrace. He lowered his gaze, his thoughts visibly weighing on him. Even after all this time, I still miss understanding. Zephyr inhaled deeply, letting the cold, damp air fill his lungs. His feathers shivered slightly in the chill. If there's one thing I do get, his voice rose with renewed strength. It's that emergence into the book I've attuned to, actualizing the procedural pieces, gives substrate to the ebb, to the flow. He reached out with a talon, grasping at something invisible yet profoundly present. Somehow, design creates energy. Frustration flickered in his eyes as he clenched his talon into a fist. I still do not understand how this is so. The wind intensified, a cold gust biting at his feathers. How does psyche connect to materialization if none occurs? He asked. His voice was tinged with both wonder and defiance. Before him lay a series of stacked materia blocks, their surfaces slick and faintly gleaming in the dim light. The blocks jutted from the marsh, forming a precarious pathway. With deliberate steps, Zephyr ascended the path, his talons finding purchase on the slick, irregular surfaces. I combine the wisdom of spirit with reality. But what is that? He mused, glancing down at the blocks. His distorted reflection stared back at him, rippling and uncertain. What is the nature of nothing? He whispered, his voice quieter now. Or the world of the senses. The mist swirled in response, curling around him like a living blanket. I am stuck in the thinking scale, he admitted, his wings spreading slightly, their edges catching the faint glow. Tell what creates the picture, he said, his voice taking on an almost poetic cadence, the living images of senses. He closed his eyes briefly as though willing the marsh to answer. Right here, right now. Is this it? Ahead, a faint ripple disturbed the mist. Zephyr's sharp gaze fixed on the disturbance as he continued. Hunger leaves the hand, sending out its first ripples, he murmured, his talons tightening slightly. Pay attention to reaction, lest it leak. He cautioned, his voice growing firmer. What source will this be? The mist thickened, obscuring the path, but Zephyr remained steadfast. Hold fast and abide, he declared, his tone resolute. The mist parted slightly, revealing a stone pathway stretching forward, the marsh fading into a distant memory. Zephyr's gaze followed the path, his figure illuminated by the faint glow of a distant star on the horizon. The world is within me, he said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of conviction and awe. He stepped onto the stone path, his movements purposeful as though each step carried the weight of revelation. Remember who you are, he intoned, his words resonating with quiet strength. Welcome, this is your journey. Ahead, the stark landscape of blocky outcrops loomed, jagged white surfaces devoid of life or color. The barren fields stood in jarring contrast to the organic, murky marsh he had just left behind. Now the ember ignites, Zephyr said, his voice steady. Hold fast and follow your light. His talons tapped softly against the stone as he ascended, the faint outline of the star above guiding him, each step carrying him closer to an unseen destination, the mist swirling in his wake. Zephyr paused briefly, his form silhouetted against the glowing horizon. Here it comes, ready or not. And with that, he pressed onward, his figure gradually fading into the field of white blocks. The star above shimmered, a silent beacon, guiding his journey into the unknown.